Welcome to the Arena Decklists podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined as always by Brian Gottlieb. And Brian.
Yes.
Do you want to say I told you so?
I don't get to say. I don't get to say I told you so. I mean, you can say that to me, I think, if you would like to. I don't feel like I have any. Why
would I do that? That's not something that I would normally do, Brian, and I'm hurt and offended.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I. Let's talk about our news items here, and then we'll work through it all.
I'm kidding. This is not we don't have an I told you so weekly update on the podcast. Although, maybe we should.
But start that section. That'd be real popular. Probably put that at the end so people can turn it off.
But so if we were trying to generate outrage, like the anger clicks on our podcast, I mean, we could do that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, especially like this past week's news, it would be pretty easy to do that. But, I think about sometimes the best version of the podcast. I don't think the best version of the podcast is the one that generates the most interest, actually. I think the best version is one that is just like fair and balanced. And so we won't chase those clicks. We'll be just our usual analytical selves and take things as they're presented to us.
But it depends on how you define best, though, right? Because best is maybe the best product for, being informative, maybe entertaining. If people somehow enjoy us, I don't know. But as far as the actual viewership numbers and people wanting to click on it every week, like, do those not factor into quote unquote best?
Here's how I'm going to define best as a creator. I think this is how all creators should define best. Make the thing that you would want to consume.
Yeah.
I just think that's the only way to do it that doesn't leave you like chasing your tail and chasing money. And because there's so many outside factors that will always drive your content. Like, should I be chasing clicks? Should I be I don't know how we're on this topic. This feels completely separate from everything. But regardless, when I go back to making the best version of my stuff, it is the stuff that I want to consume over and over and over. That's what I turn to, the stuff that has a purpose. And it's why, like, some of my most popular articles, I think, are not what I consider my best articles. They're just like balancing acts that are designed to get as much engagement as possible. But I always try and sprinkle in some of myself in that, right? Like, even when I'm doing a clickbaity top 10 list, I try and do it in a way that appeals to what I would want to read. And to be honest, I like top 10 lists. Like, I know they're clickbaity, but I still enjoy them. So I think there's some merit there too.
What if the only content I like to consume is Ponzi scheme adjacent?
I don't have any help for you there.
Should I go ahead with making that content? That's the advice I'm getting.
I guess if that's the type of person you are, like, you'll probably be able to surround yourself with those people, and got it. Bold. You can live with those consequences. Go for it.
Bold new life direction. Anyway, banned and restricted announcement. You mentioned before the cast. Why are we dealing in R's anymore?
Not a lot of R's these days, but we still call it B&R. But
if we called it the BS announcement, that would not be great.
Fit. No, that would be.
It would fit. It would be accurate, but it would not be great.
Although it's less BS in this announcement than there has been in the last few. I'll say that. I think this is a trending away from BS.
Okay, this is one of those things where, like the World's Payout, for example, where they reinstate the payout and everyone's like, yeah, good job, Wizards. Like, you're so awesome, Wizards. We love you. We knew you cared about the people. And it's like, they try to take it away in the first place, right? Like, them reinstating it doesn't now make them good. So I don't know. This announcement is like, kind of, these things shouldn't have happened in the first place in a lot of instances, right? So it's like, oh, well, now they're finally getting suspended or I don't know, altered somewhat. And it's just like, well, we shouldn't have done this in the first place.
Yeah, there's that argument to make. I was talking more about like the wealth of information, or wealth is generous.
It's a good amount of information. No, you're right about that. You are.
There is still some BS to be found, though. We'll get to it all.
All right. Start with historic. And in a couple weeks, there is a PTQ level format or tournament on Arena that is the historic format. So this is relevant. This is good timing. I think it gives people enough time to figure out the brand new landscape of the format and everything. So I like that. For historic, Tibalt's Trickery is banned in historic. Not going to mess around with the S on this one. No suspended. Memory Lapse is suspended. Brainstorm is now banned. Shocker. From suspended.
No one could have seen that coming. Nobody. It's just who knew Brainstorm would be good? It's just almost impossible.
Well, so we're like, why are they even suspending it? They're just going to ban it. And then with Tibalt's Trickery, they're just like, no, we're just going to ban this. So I approve of that. But again, I guess it kind of calls into question, like, why are you suspending Memory Lapse? Why don't you just ban that too?
Good question. I don't know what the suspended list does. I mean, like it started as an interesting idea. It hasn't delivered. I would wrap it up. No.
Yeah, they're just kind of like, maybe, but I don't know, whatever. So we didn't get wildcards from suspended stuff, right?
No, you get it when it's actually moved to the ban list.
Dude, I'm about to be rich. Got Brainstorms, Tibalt's Trickeries.
8 wildcards, 8 big ones headed to your account, I believe. So
I just opened up another color pair in Standard. That is just what happened right now.
That's true.
I got 8 dual lands.
Dual lands, yeah. Big get for you.
Also, 5 digital-only cards are being rebalanced. Davriel's Withering and Davriel's Soul Broker's third ability now only affect target creature and opponent controls. Good change. Also, probably should have started with that. I get that it's extra text, but why would you want to do that to your own creature unless you're up to no good?
It's a good safety valve. We've talked a lot in the last few weeks about safety valves, how important they are, how they're being slowly reinstated. They skipped it on the digital cards, and this is how you do it. Good safety valve, keeps things simple.
Yeah, like it. Faceless Agent, now a 2/2 from 2/1. I had to look up what this card does.
Yeah, this is not going to move any needles, I don't think.
It's 3 mana, I believe, colorless changeling that does the weird tutor thing for a creature in your deck or something.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that could matter in some spots. I don't think what was holding this card back, though, is the lack of a second point of toughness.
No, but it helps, right? It's like, well, we thought that this card was going to see some amount of play. It isn't. And maybe if we just gently nudge it.
Yeah, I'm cool with the adjustment. I really have no beef with it. It's fine.
Yeah. Sarkin, Wanderer to Shivs. I'm like saying it really weird because I don't know like what is part of the card or whatever.
Sarkin, you don't know when the card ends.
Yeah, Sarkin, Wanderer to Shiv, I believe is the Planeswalker now that I've read the sentence. Anyway, that thing's second ability is now +1 from a +0. That's the thing that puts a Shivan Dragon into your hand.
Yeah.
And Subversive Acolyte now costs 1B instead of BB, and that's like the weirdo 2/2 that becomes something else and then a Phyrexian Negator.
Yeah, so I already thought that card was pretty good and didn't have to be digital. It's much better now and should, I think, see some amount of play. I don't know where. I don't think it has like a set home, but it's a good card. It's
basically Figure of Destiny, Ascendant Spirit.
Yeah.
Things along those lines. And
with a very good type.
Yeah, true. And it being like double black definitely, I don't want to say like closes the door from a lot of archetypes, but it definitely makes it harder to justify playing it in Rakdos or Orzhov or things like that. So again, if this is a card that you're like, oh, we want to see constructed play or we expected to see constructed play, making this change definitely makes sense, even if maybe it's not super flavorful for it to be 1B versus BB.
Right. Doesn't really call out the Phyrexian nature of the card.
Yeah, but Negator was 2 and a B anyway. So.
Oh, that's true. That is true. I feel like Negator's kind of like the outmoded version of Phyrexians. Like that's the old school way before we really fleshed out the flavor a little more. But still, it's certainly an iconic one, and you can call back to it and be close.
Yeah. So digital only cards getting altered, I think is definitely good. I definitely do not like how, and I mostly skimmed this, but I don't even think that they mentioned that they're not giving wild cards.
Nope. I think that was very purposeful because if you're going to make adjustments like this, it's just like there is a metagame for how online TCGs deal with these things. And you can argue about whether it should be done differently or not, but regardless of your personal feelings, it's very clear the playbook is out there in Hearthstone, in dozens of other games that have come after it.
And it's not like Hearthstone's economy was like widely lauded as, oh, this is the best thing to be doing.
Certainly not regarded as hyper generous or anything.
Right.
And that's the thing that I'm getting to. There's this playbook. Every single time Magic has the opportunity to do the one that just generates more buy-in, eats up more wild cards, that's what they choose to do every single time.
Yeah.
And at some point it's like, enough's enough. Like, if you rebalance a card in the digital TCG space, you give back wild cards. Basically every other game does this. Magic does not. On top of that, it's the most expensive one of all these TCGs. It's the one like that demands the most upkeep, the one that is most affected by bans, I think, because of the way they do these policies, the one that has zero dusting. So once you get these cards, you are stuck with them. That's just not how anyone else would handle this. And it's another example of Arena being a really aggressive monetization take, especially when it comes to the most enfranchised players like you and I. I think there's some upsides to Arena when it comes to free-to-play players and maybe people who fall somewhere in the middle. I think it's an okay program as far as its generosity goes. Certainly not among the best, but acceptable. When it comes to you and I, we just get hosed repeatedly.
Yeah, I mean, that generosity comes with, like, you must dedicate X amount of hours.
Sure, and I think that's like a free-to-play game. That's all of them. There's not many that give you everything without giving a bunch of hours back to it.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, like, it's a lot, like a lot.
It is.
It's not as bad as like some stuff where it's like, oh, you didn't log in today, therefore you're like a week behind now or whatever. Right. You know, it is. If you want to play like every other day and try and keep up or whatever, you could very much do that. So, pros and cons. But these last three cards were buffed. I mean, you could maybe argue for a Subversive Acolyte in your Black Devotion deck or whatever. But for the most part, these last three cards were buffed. But for the Davriel stuff, like Davriel's Withering, not really a big deal. It's a common or uncommon.
Correct. Davriel Soul Broker is the one that rubs me the wrong way.
Soul Broker's a mythic, and it was feeding a combo deck that isn't in line with normal things, right? Like if you had to craft Davriel Soul Broker to build your deck, you probably had to craft some other weird stuff too.
Yeah. I mean, Meat Hook Massacre comes to mind as another card. I mean, that's thankfully good in standard.
Yeah, that's just a fine card, right? Yeah. So I think that is okay, but I don't know, man. It's already pretty bad when, say you ban, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a good example kind of in the, Time Warp or whatever sort of vein where it's like, there's Mizzix's Mastery Ultimatum deck that had a bunch of Time Warp. It's like this super weird deck, right? And it's like you absolutely obliterate that deck by getting rid of this one piece, and the recompense for that is like, oh, you get some Time Warps back or whatever, some mythic
not all
cards.
The other worthless pieces surrounding it.
Right. And I really don't think that they should be making it so players don't want to engage in that sort of behavior, like try out new things, like craft new cards, like I'm not saying that they should just get like a full refund on their deck or anything, but in the very least, you should give them some mythics to cover the Davriels, right?
I agree. I think there's a good argument to be made that like bans should get paid on a 2-for-1 basis. I really think so. Like, I don't think that's overly generous. Now, granted, given all the bans they have been, they would hear that and be like, well, we're giving away a lot of wild cards. And I'm sure they would pause. Well, here's some incentive to get it right. I mean, if the mistakes aren't being made at that level, you make more money. And I think everyone benefits from that kind of arrangement when there's a little bit more onus on these designs to get it right and not really unbalance things. Maybe more attention has to be paid and we end up with a better product and people are happier with the economy. I don't know. It does feel predatory. This is the spot where like, if I wanted to make the really like appealing in terms of clicks version of this podcast, I act just outraged over the moon and we have to burn this down. I'm just like disappointed again. And it lumps in with a bunch of other disappointments about the Arena economy. And it's not going to be the thing that stops me from playing. And I'm still going to craft cards all the time and spend too much money on it. But I don't know. You just want to ask for more, right? And hope that at some point they're like, yeah, we've taken enough and we can give back here.
Okay, check this out. I scrolled 3 lines up and saw Tibalt's Trickery, which is actually the perfect example.
Fair.
Right? Because that card gets banned. You get your 4 wild cards. Well, what about whatever Ulamogs and Ugins and the mana base and all the nonsense that you crafted along with it, right?
Yeah. And there was a lot of nonsense in that deck. So that is a good example.
Right. So, I mean, technically, those cards are still playable. I mean, they're not, right? They don't show up in tier 1, tier 2, even tier 3 decks, really. So, not so much. But, yeah, it's just one of those things that's always been kind of a sore spot with stuff like this. But it just kind of is what it is.
Yeah. So, what about, I'm getting away from the dollars and cents of all this. What about what this does to the format? I mean, I don't think Tibalt's Trickery is really exerting that much influence on the format at this point. But you can argue that Memory Lapse was probably the most important card in the format.
Yeah, it was in all of my decks. I will say that. I don't think that I'm the average Arena player, and certainly I played against decks that did not have Memory Lapse in it, but
they should have.
Good God, that card is nice.
Yeah.
It dramatically changes things, but it's also kind of weird because I've been playing, not as much standard as I've been playing, but like a decent amount of historic, trying out some new stuff with the Jumpstart cards and everything, and preparing to make content for next week for this upcoming historic PTQ and everything. And like Lapse plus Archmage's Charm is just, it's like, the old extended decks that had like Counterspell and Force of Will, like you're just a brick wall. Like no one is getting anything through of relevance. And then it's like, oh, they slip something through. Well, I guess I have to like Wrath of God or Fatal Push or whatever. So that opens the doors a little bit, which is nice. And for tempo decks, I saw some like Delver decks that look pretty good. And I played with some of them. And I don't think those decks can exist without Memory Lapse, right?
Right.
So Blue is getting significantly weakened. I think it is still very good, but it mostly just puts it closer in line with everything else in the format, which is just dramatically a good thing.
Yeah, so I agree with like 95% of that.
Oh, no. What did I do wrong?
Well, here's the one thing that I continue to believe is an outlier in Historic that can't be here forever because you'll always be balancing around it. It's the Jund sacrifice stuff. And I think what these blue cards did was get all of these decks on the level where they were starting to be able to compete with that strategy, which was just better than everything else, quite frankly. And after the print of these cards, there was a good argument that these decks had caught up. But now you've taken away Brainstorm, you've taken away Memory Lapse. I think it just leaves the Jund decks on a power level different from everything else that exists. And given the finicky nature of Jund's gameplay, I don't love that. I really think like as a long-term problem for Historic, this is one that we could have dealt with a while ago and the format would have been better off for it. As to where things stand now, I think those decks have a big edge. I think a lot of what had been popping up recently, combo-ish type stuff is really hard targeted by the Jund stuff. I'm thinking of creature combo in particular. So Scurry-O, whatever you want to do, however you want to put it together. Most of those decks had moved past Vesper Lark anyway, and I think correctly so. But they're all kind of dogs to these Jund strategies. And I am worried about how much of the metagame Jund eats up without the blue decks able to keep pace with it. I think it just sits on a tier alone at the moment. It's tier 0. And that's at the moment. There's certainly enough new cards where you can look at all this stuff. But I know like during the hopeful period of Jumpstart, all the deck building I was doing, a lot of it was predicated on the idea that if Jund is around, this does not work.
We are building different factions of the format, my friend.
Probably true.
Again, this is like ladder play, right? So I would like to actually sit down and, play you, for example, with Is It Phoenix or Azorius Control or Mono Red, Dragon Rage's Channeler, Madness, Mana Gorger, Phoenix type of stuff, because my experience with those decks has been that like the Jund matchup is fine, and it didn't seem like it was wildly out of control or anything.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. You're working on a different axis of the format, and that is fair. Those decks are probably playing tighter than the stuff that is like creature combo-y, Esper Sentinel, humans, anything that's just playing to the battlefield really hard. But you see like the squeeze in that, right?
I do.
You want to have more battlefield play incentivized, and if Jund is just eating up that entire portion of the metagame, I don't love that.
Well, now you have Mono Red, baby.
Yeah,
that's super good, right?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think the format's in an okay place. When we're playing with the breaks off and are sculpting things to be exactly how we want them, to the extent that like we're changing the mana costs of this card that we clearly planted because we wanted it to matter, I would not have cat oven stuff be part of the format, and I would just leave it at that.
Yeah, that's fair. I also think that, I don't know, Unholy Heat, expressive iteration type of stuff is also just going to be very detrimental to the success of random creature decks anyway.
True.
So I don't think it's fair to place all of that squarely on Jund's shoulders, but I definitely agree with you that having those things in the format suppressing what would otherwise be, like fun, healthy additions to the format is not a good thing.
Yeah,
so,
think about like how many interesting tribal decks there are.
Yeah.
Right? There's like goblins, humans, elves, all these things. Merfolk. Merfolk's actually pretty good.
And now we have Faceless Agent just as an absolute beast at a 2/2. So
fits in everything. You play it everywhere. All the tribal decks are better now. But you get the picture. Like there's a certain portion of the metagame being beat up. It's fine though. I will let this one shake out and see what these new adjustments do to the format. There's got to be some churn here because the cards are too powerful not to kind of rebalance. And also the format doesn't get the level of focus that is really conducive to solving a format. It's just not played in like a big tournament setting, and ladder is not going to solve any format. So.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Have you done the math? Have you done your own research?
Yes,
Okay.
I've done my own research.
Okay, well, if you've done your own research, then I trust you.
Well documented.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about the BS list, the BS announcement?
No. Well, yeah.
Standard, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. So I am banned from talking about bans in standard anymore. I banned myself from doing so.
Nice.
So I will just say, this is the world we live in. I accept this decision. I don't think it's even like hard wrong, which is one of the things that gets lost in these Twitter arguments. I felt there should have been Alrund's Epiphany bans. To what degree was I sure that was the correct thing to do? Like 65-35. And I think both the decision to ban and decision to not ban have costs that come with them. And I don't really fault anyone for falling on the no ban side. I think you can play it out, see what happens. And that's a fine approach. I would have done it differently. But since this is where we are, I accept it. I'm cool with it. And we're going to talk more about what to play in standard based on where we stand right now.
Yeah, I mean, we have 4 playable decks. So that's up from 2.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 of them are like, what?
Very similar.
15 cards different or something. But regardless, I don't know, if you like extreme polar opposite ends of a format, then this is the format for you. Modern players, I feel like you would maybe appreciate this standard format.
Maybe. Games aren't bad. I think the games are like, a lot of them are very good.
Yeah, I feel like the thing that's missing is like, oh, I don't even have this sort of card available to me that could potentially swing this matchup or whatever. And that's kind of annoying. It's like, well, okay, yeah, the games are fine, but like, if I were able to tune my deck and include this card, then the games would feel better. It would feel like I have actual agency and I'm actually doing something, as opposed to just like, I don't know, the games play out fine, but like you don't really have any agency, I guess.
What's interesting is that the decks that I have gravitated towards during this format are the ones,
the non-agency ones.
Well, no, I would say actually. So I started on non-agency ones, and now I've floated to ones where I feel like customization of sideboard slots is big. It matters, and it's not that you have good options. It's just like having the best options and having a plan is worth a lot. Again, I'll save it till we talk hard standard, which we are going to do at the end of this episode.
Yeah, I agree with that. They just don't make it easy on us, you know?
They don't make it easy, which is okay. I mean, I think that makes it interesting. And like I said, I don't hate the standard format. I think it is solid. I just wanted a great standard format. And I thought we needed a great standard format. And I don't think this is it.
I wonder what would have happened if Crimson Vow were like a month or two out.
I don't know. That's a good question. And my biggest hope is just like, I don't want to head into Crimson Vow preview season and be like, this doesn't matter because these cards exist. I really hope that's the case.
It is.
So but it's got to be it's already the lens. It has to be the lens at which we look at this new set. So Agreed. Things have already been altered by that.
It is interesting though, because all of this Twitter discourse and then Worlds happened, and then it was like the best possible scenario for them, where like the two decks that met in the finals were ones that people weren't really talking about, you know, and it's like they're old decks, you know, so that wasn't super exciting or whatever, but it did make it look not as bad as it actually is.
It did on the surface, but when you go back to like the actual principles, it was an Alrund's Epiphany deck versus a aggro deck that had to warp.
I know.
To
aggro deck splashing counter spells. I know.
Right. Like that's it. That's the argument. It's either hyperlinear aggro deck splashing counter spells, Alrund's Epiphany, and that's all that can exist. And that has
I know that, Brian, but they don't know that.
Okay.
They look at it and they're like, this is an Epiphany or mono green. This format looks great. And there's like some white weenie decks. Let's go.
As long as everyone's happy. That's all I care about.
Okay. Well, then let's obfuscate the truth from them. And
the key to happiness, actually, obfuscation of truth.
In a lot of instances, because the truth usually kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes it doesn't. And then we can spread that truth, maybe.
I'm down for that.
Anyway, another announcement. Stranger Things, businesses and happenings. You are going to carry this because I don't really have anything to say.
All right. I have two things to say. This is going to be real brief. All right. Three things. I don't really care that they're making this. If this is an important product for you, good. I'm happy you get this. I hope a lot of people out there enjoy this. There is something with the pipeline from production to release that is rendering these things not timely enough. I could see Stranger Things being a big deal 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Is it now? I mean, I know I'm kind of like out of touch old man, so I'm going to ask you, other out of touch old man, Jerry, is Stranger Things a big thing right now? My read is no.
My read is also no. It's not. It's like season 1 of Stranger Things was like how Squid Game is now, right?
Yes.
It's just like everyone's talking about it. It's a huge part of the zeitgeist. If you could drop that secret lair or whatever, you know, in that moment, gangbusters, right? It's all over. But, you know, 2 seasons later, they're fine seasons, right? If you enjoyed the first season, you may enjoy season 2 and season 3, but it's not as novel anymore. We've already done this song and dance. So it took a while. And I don't think it was like, oh, in the middle of season 1, WotC started getting this rolling. It's like the secret lairs weren't even happening then yet, right? So I would think that in the future, maybe they will be more on top of this.
I hope so. I think that matters for the success of these things. I will say that just like buzz-wise on this, again, just one out of touch old man's impressions. Don't take this as gospel. But looking at like Twitter, looking at our Discord, very little discussion of this that I've seen. Even like bad discussion, just not that many people who are talking about it at all.
It's not even like, you know, we're 3 seasons removed, basically, from when this was all the hotness, right? It's like the last year and a half was like 2 decades long also.
Yes, yes, that is true.
Season 1 of Stranger Things feels so far away, right?
It definitely does. All right, now I want to talk about the actual cards.
Sure.
I don't think they matter. Like the concern with Walking Dead was like, oh, these cards might be good. I don't see any of that happening here. But I do have some questions.
So
you have seen all of Stranger Things, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I only watched it once, right? And I was probably doing something else because that's just what I do, ADHD and all that. But I feel like whatever you're about to say, I could probably get the reference, I suppose.
Because I've only seen season 1. I haven't seen season 2 or 3. So I'm going to say some stuff, and I don't know if it's actually true.
Do they refer to 11 as a mage?
Well, no, that wasn't the core of my question, but it is 11 based. So I'm going to read this card. The card is 11 the Mage. It's 1 colorless and a Grixis, so blue, black, red. Legendary creature, human wizard. Your maximum hand size is 11. Whenever 11 the Mage attacks, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Then if you have 11 or more cards in your hand, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. Friends forever, which I believe is just a rephrasing of the partner mechanic.
Yeah, it's partner.
And then it is a 3/5 creature.
Is it, was the question going to be like, do they ever reference the number 11? Do they ever seem like, is that actually significant?
Isn't her name just 11? Like,
that's it. That's it.
Oh, that is the core of my question. So
it's not like, her magical abilities are based on the properties of the number 11. No, it has nothing to do with anything. I also like maybe they refer to her abilities as magic at some point, but I don't remember that. So like calling her a mage and like a wizard, and it's like whatever.
That's the like I can let that slide because you have to like shoehorn it into this world. So if you're gonna do this stupid thing, you have to make some of those leaps anyway.
And they're gonna reskin it at some point, so having it be a human wizard may be relevant. Whatever.
Sure. The 11 stuff though, I'm just like this borders on like almost a mean criticism. I tried not to keep my criticism. I try and keep them just surface level and not mean and attack the person who was tasked with making this card, because this is like an impossibly stupid task. Like if someone came to me and like design 11, I'd be like, why? And they're like, money, and then that's the end of it. And I'm like, okay, here's my 11. Please leave me alone now.
Yeah, it's just like how much are you getting paid for this job? You know, like
yeah. So I don't want to be too harsh, but this feels like the type of Magic card where if you were like doodling in your notebook in 7th grade and asked to make it 11, you'd be like, well, it has to reference 11 all over the card. It's got to be an 11/11 and it should cost 11 mana.
Yeah. So what happens when they reskin the card and it just references the number 11 a bunch? You're just like, what?
I mean, that kind of like makes more sense than it being tied to this character who has no relation to the number 11 whatsoever, except for the name. And that's the thing that just jumped off the page. Also, like being a 3/5 felt weird to me. Because like, sure, 11, again, only seeing the first season is like powerful, but not like hardy and resistant to a bunch of damage. And I don't know. The whole thing feels very weird and cash grabby, but that is what this is. And if you like these cards, I don't mean to dampen your enthusiasm. Please enjoy Friends Forevering up Chief Jim Hopper and 11 the Mage in your Commander games, and do whatever that leads you towards.
Yeah. I feel like she's more well known for just like killing stuff too, but whatever, you know?
Egos.
Oh, yeah, sure. Ego tokens, food tokens. There you go.
Food tokens. Yeah. I'm surprised we skipped that one. But I mean, I would rather see that than 11, honestly.
Just wait for the secretist lair.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Anything else?
No, that ends my spiel about Stranger Things.
Yeah. Okay. So I mentioned the mage thing where it's like, I don't know if they mentioned it. I guess I don't remember if they mentioned this. I don't remember it, but I'm not positive. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe people are going to tell us we're stupid and it has a lot to do with the lore or whatever, but I doubt it.
I thought she was like the 11th experiment in that whatever facility that she was broken out of. So
yeah.
I don't know. Please, Stranger Things experts, DM me, correct me, let me know where I'm wrong.
Nah, don't do that to me.
Right, DM Cedric Phillips. Cedric A. Phillips on Twitter. Let him know what you think about 11. He's dying to hear about it.
And Facebook and Instagram and Twitch.
He's on every platform. You just find him anywhere. You reach out, you'll hit Cedric Phillips. So just go ahead, message him all about 11. He loves that stuff.
Twitch.tv streaming Midnight Hunt drafts. He currently has 22 trophies on Magic Online. No big
Twice
deal.
as many as 11, just so you know.
Oh, good call. All right, standard time. What would you play this weekend?
Mono white.
It is okay. What if it was online? Does it matter that I know that you bought the deck in foil?
Mono white.
So clearly you're locked into playing it in real life, but online, dude.
Yeah, mono white.
No, it's a good deck. It's a good deck.
I think it's very good. I think, as I mentioned, if you have a read on the metagame, you can customize it. Now you're using a very small set of tools to customize it. Things like Guardian of Faith gives you your sweeper protection, but it's backbreaking. I mean, like a well-timed Guardian of Faith can blow out your sweeper-based opponent and leave them with no recourse because your clock is so good. And that's the thing, like these are all small little edges you get, but you don't need a lot because your clock is so resilient, so strong, so fast, can be evasive in a bunch of instances. So you only need these little speed bumps and, adjusting the number of Brutal Cathars versus Skyclave Apparitions can matter a bunch. Deciding whether you're playing Redain in the main deck is worth a lot. All these small adjustments that if you feel like you have a really good read on the metagame, you can get a few more percentage points. And I think your baseline percentage points are already good. That's the thing that really drives mono white is you're just consistent, super consistent, very good clock. And then if you make the right calls, you're pushing this deck to some really good win rates. And the data is also just like hard skewed towards this deck. Every single time I see one of those stupid square charts, it's got mono white off the charts. And I was skeptical. I think a lot of it, I was just leaning towards, this is an easier deck to play and it's benefiting from not being the focal point of the format, which I think is still true.
No, it's definitely true.
But at the same time, it's got protection. It's got protection because Alrund's Epiphany is out there. And the ways I would challenge this mono white deck, I think they get eaten up by Alrund's Epiphany really, really hard. And that's going to serve this deck very well until the moment where you just have to respect it. And then I think you're going to try and see, maybe a mono black comeback, or even you can look at things like, is it dragons and not necessarily the Alrund's Epiphany list as a way to challenge this deck a little bit more effectively. But I think ultimately all that stuff is going to get pushed back down and there should be space for this deck. And certainly this week, I'd be very comfortable playing mono white.
There's a period of time where people were like, I'll play a couple Cinderclasms just cause, like, who knows, and now it's like, now play one main deck, max out in your sideboard, just actually respect the deck, and you should be fine because it is out there. It is a sizable portion of the metagame. It's a good deck, and you have to respect it. On another note, Guardian of Faith is a card that when it came out, I started putting in my deck list, and like it didn't really seem like other people were. And it was the exact type of card where it serves a role, but it doesn't do it very well. And you're just like, well, I still kind of have to keep playing it because there's nothing else. And it's cool that people are coming around on it now, even though it kind of sucks.
Yeah, well, like we said, you have tools, but they're not great ones. And if that's the way you're forced, you're going to do it every single time if it wins you the game. That's what it's all about, W's. And this card puts a lot of W's on the board when your opponent, especially when your opponent is relying on 5 mana sweepers. That's the whole thing. Is like you mentioned Cinderclasm. Okay, Cinderclasm, that can still do work before this card is ready. Its timing is really flexible, which is huge. You're trying to burn down the house and answer this white deck. Guardian of Faith will eat you up. Like it will destroy you. And that's a really vulnerable position to be in.
Yeah, I remember a match I played on Arena that did feel real nice where like my Guardian of Faiths were trading with Sod Cummings and stuff like that. just like, flash threat into their turn.
Sure.
Type of scenario
with that.
Where it's like I had a little bit of pressure and then had the Guardian in case they had a sweeper, and then was just start trading it for like the mana on their turn. And it was like, this is the best this card has ever been.
Every now and then it can still impress. And that's, I think like I feel that way about all of these sideboard cards, like Curse of Silence. This card is silly. It really is silly, but like pushing your opponent off a key spell especially when you know it's coming due to your elite spellbinders, and then turning this into a resource when you're finally done with it. It's big. It fits the mono white game plan. And I can't tell you how many times I've named like Goldspan Dragon, it's weird. It's not really what you would expect this card to do. But with perfect information, again, that can be a game-breaking effect. And when you have a really good clock, you don't need much to really break the game open.
Okay, so what is different about your white aggro deck versus other folks?
Not much. I think I lean a little bit harder away from Redain and towards the Brutal Cathar, Skyclave Apparition. My current list is Brutal Cathar mains, all 4 Skyclave Apparition on the sideboard, just to break open any type of aggro mirror. Having access to the full 8 of these 3 mana creatures that can kill another creature, it makes these games laughable if your opponents don't have access to that. So mono green, the mono white mirror, I feel very favored with that configuration because I think a lot of people are getting away from that. And then it's just a lot of stolen tech from the folks who played mono white at Worlds. What's the stupid Dungeons and Dragons card with the silly name that is modal and doesn't do much, but I really, really like? Something about a road. Come upon a road.
Yeah.
So
like bounce a creature that you control.
Bounce your creature and +1/+3. So you get a little bit of sweeper protection. You get like basically you're doing the Snakeskin Veil effect against Dragon's Fire, any kind of damage-based spot removal. And that's good. I
remember seeing that in the list, and I was like, what matchup is that even for? Does it counter a fight in most instances?
It can, that's a completely fine usage for it. I think the sizing can matter in mirrors even. The fact you can get rebuys on your Brutal Cathars or protect them, to get the removal again, but especially Skyclave Apparition, once that is in, it can make a really big difference. Elite Spellbinder is another great target. And like, you're not doing these things because you have these combos. Like, that's not the purpose. You're trying to set this up. But the fact that your Snakeskin Veil, your 1 mana removal counterspell, also has those synergies that you can work towards in the late game, the card has earned its spot as far as I'm concerned. And I didn't think that was the case when I first read it. I was like, there's got to be something better. No, there's not. There's not a lot of good options, but you make the best out of what you have and you end up with a really good package.
Yeah, I don't know. I was mostly looking at it like they Blizzard Brawl their 4/4 on my Brutal Cathar, and I have this card. I don't even really think it does anything.
Scoop that Brutal Cathar up. Use it again on the next turn. I mean, it's not the ideal scenario, but like you first of all,
this is exactly the card I'm talking about, Brian.
If your concern is mono green, your head's in the wrong place. Like, you're fine in that
I know.
matchup.
I'm talking about in the context of Worlds when I saw it in the list. That was
sure. And I guess like it's a prediction of the field. I think on the whole, Worlds maybe overcompensated a little bit towards the green side of things.
They did,
and
for sure.
That has some interesting ripple effects. But like I said, I don't even think like this card is what I'm looking for in green. I love it against the red decks, really countering a Dragon's Fire, getting a rebuy on your elite spellbinder, protecting a key spell like, say, Redain. If Redain's in a spot where it's really effective, that's all good, all enough to push you to victory. Again, when your clock is really good. So.
Okay.
Sorry. I know it's not the sexiest option. You're not going to be thrilled to play it. I'm never going to argue it's a great Magic card, but you find the tools you need, especially when we're in a short standard. Not a lot of cards in this standard right now. We're only playing one color. So I would say that the thing that has ultimately pushed me away from mono green and towards mono white is that I feel like I can make some really strong sideboard plans with mono white that are I feel like the aggressor basically in the matchup. I feel like the questions I'm asking my opponents with my mono white deck are better than what they're asking me. Whereas on the green side, I had to answer their questions. I had to find ways around what they were doing. And that's why like maxing Snakeskin Veil was how I was answering things like Fading Hope. Well, in this case, my creatures are a little bit cheaper. They have comes into play abilities. So I'm naturally answering Fading Hope, and I get to be the one answering the questions or asking the questions in the post-board games.
No, that makes sense. And I think that those are good reasons to play the deck in general.
That and the fact that I haven't been playing as much since the ladder reset this month, mostly because like I was high in the format, now I'm medium on it. I don't think I've lost with the mono white deck. Like I am pushing up towards high diamond now, and that's not because I've played a lot of games. I just don't think I've lost a game, honestly, not one. And at some point, you're just gonna be like, well, I'm winning all the time, so stick with it.
Yeah, you're I don't know. You're just like consistently much further in the ladder than I am.
Well, this is based on actually going to Mythic last month.
Yeah, so you
only getting reset to Platinum.
Yeah, you start a little bit higher than me, and I guess you're playing white aggro, whereas I'm playing like these random blue decks on my phone, which takes a while.
Yes.
So all these things maybe add up, but I don't know. It is interesting to me. I'm I've played with a lot of the Epiphany decks, and I started merging them once the Worlds list came out. I had like an Is It Lear deck that looked pretty good, and since then, the Saturday, I think, during Worlds, there was an SCG tournament that Danny Jessup went 5-1 with Demir, and I've been playing his deck. I'm writing about it this week, and that deck's pretty good too. But yeah, the game's going until like turn 15. You know, dude, you've played some Demir Lear decks in your day.
Oh, I've played basically this deck. I mean, this was very close to what I was playing early on in the format. The changes you have made, getting away from Memory Deluge, going towards Behold the Multiverse, I support that. Things like the Celestis, making the main deck, support that as well. I think it just has proven itself as a good tool for control. But a lot of what I'm looking at in your list, we're just on the same page. Like this is basically where I started. The biggest addition, of course, Go Blank. I think that was some key tech that I was never going to find. But playing that in conjunction with Lear is a game changer for sure.
Well, you didn't really need it either.
That's fair.
When Epiphany started popping up, I was playing Go Blank in some of my decks, but I wasn't going like that hard on it. It was like, oh, I play 2, maybe 3 in like the mono black snow deck, where I was like, oh, I need like a big sideboard plan, right? And this list is like, yeah, play a main deck and sideboard the other copies or whatever. It's like, okay, damn, going hard.
Yeah, but it makes sense given how important the card has become, how good it is at holding down the Epiphany decks and keeping them resource light, and just like a new setup of endgame with Lear. Like when I was building the first Lear deck, my endgame was answer every creature that was being played. And that's fine. You still have to do that. And your deck is still set up to do that for sure. But there are new concerns. And, I had gotten as far as main deck Duress to counter Epiphany and other control decks. But once you are like, this is a huge percentage of the metagame, Go Blank main is completely correct. No question about it.
Until you play against mono white. Then it's less good.
You hope it does something. Like it's obviously not there for the matchup, but it's never completely dead, right? Like you can snagging those last 2 cards can matter.
It technically trades with their cards, but that's not the issue. It's always about winning on board, basically. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, but you have plenty of options in post-board games. You've got 2 more Crippling Fears, a Blood Chief Thirst, the Soul Shatter, Shadow's Verdict, all this stuff in your sideboard where you can just do the shift, stop worrying about their hand and worry about the battlefield.
Respect. I respect the mono white.
Got to do it.
That's why I have many, many Crippling Fears. Deck is cool. Maybe not the best deck in the format, but like my list, like the place where it's at. I could see playing mono white or Is It Dragons instead. Perfectly reasonable options.
So why don't we talk about our new world champion a little bit? Fairies Master, Yuta Takashi. Now just Master. I'm done with Fairies, just absolute Master. Kind of an off the beaten path choice. Played an older deck and just didn't lose a match of Standard the entire time.
Yeah, 0-3 in draft. And I don't know if this was like purposeful or accidental, but being able to 0-3 and still win the tournament is awesome structure.
Yeah,
so
I agree with that.
That is definitely cool. It is awesome to see it happen. Just an absolute badass. And yeah, 10-0 casually in standard with Is It Dragons. And I don't know. I think that A, his list was good, and B, people just weren't really prepared for Goldspan Dragon.
Yep.
And
that was the biggest takeaway from the tournament. It was Goldspan Dragon was so well set up.
Yeah, it's still good.
Yep.
The mono green decks shaved on Ran 7, which definitely helps Goldspan's cause, right?
Yep.
And I think that makes sense because you want to get a little leaner both against Is It and in the mirror matches. And yeah, I don't know. Like people just like didn't have answers. Obviously, there were no black decks really in the field. There was the Grixis decks that had like a Soul Shatter or something, but like that card's not seeing any play. So like if you want to trade with this card, they're gonna get a pretty sizable mana advantage from it usually. So that definitely bodes well for them. And then it's just proactive, and that's kind of where you want to be. And there aren't a lot of things that stop it. Like Andre had 2 tests of talents where, you know, in other versions of Epiphany before that, you might see like Disdainful Strokes or something.
Right.
But, you know, you just move away from Answers to Goldspan Dragon and suddenly it starts looking really good because it's just untouchable.
Yeah, and that's the way the game's played out in many instances. Goldspan Dragon on the table for many turns and just playing a huge role in turning the corner, pressuring opponents immediately. And I don't know. I mean, like, do you predict a full resurgence for this deck now? Is it just another part of the metagame, or was this a small field type situation where things had gotten a little inbred and focused on beating mono green? So there was a hole for this deck to step through. I really don't know where we fall going forward in the next few weeks.
I think you can look at it as a separate entity or as a different option or a different version of the normal Is It Epiphany decks. And I think for me, it's easier to just look at it as a different Epiphany deck because it's playing a lot of the same cards, and many of the things that the Epiphany decks have to do to keep up with mono green and mono white, the Is It Dragons deck is also doing, where, you know, like you just play Smoldering Egg. It blocks and eventually transforms. It potentially wrecks your opponent's battlefield, and things like Burn Down the House are not necessarily as good against those decks because they have things like Faceless Haven or Seeka's Chariot in the mono white case, like Guardian of Faith, maybe.
Yep.
So just having ways that are proactive to be good against those decks is just a better place to be than trying to be super reactive. And Goldspan Dragon is just a step forward. And we even saw like Andre have 2 copies of Goldspan in his sideboard, right? So like he's already making those steps, and Takahashi just, you know, maybe accidentally, I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but yeah, he just went further with it. And that was where you wanted to be.
Yeah, I think a great deck building call, beautiful play as well. So a very deserving world champion without a doubt.
Worth noting too that he had 4 Memory Deluge in his deck, which is a little bit clunky. And I definitely saw instances of him, you know, not having double blue for it and stuff like that. So it's not perfect, but when you know that your Goldspan Dragon is going to live and you're just going to end up with a bunch of treasures and maybe getting double mana off those treasures too.
Right.
That's the perfect card to have, right? Because it just always keeps gas in the tank.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where this format started, right? Is you just got to do these things. You got to have your Goldspan Dragon, and most of my list at that point were for Memory Deluge because wow, is the payoff massive once you're flashing this back. At some point, the format adjusted, and you weren't expecting to keep around Goldspan Dragon forever. As soon as you go back to a place, though, where they're just there, ready to do their thing, yeah, make the shift back to Deluge. Like you said, I think like there should always be some consideration of splits between Behold the Multiverse, Memory Deluge. It looked like just a really hard for Memory Deluge. We're done with Behold. There's merit to Behold without a doubt, but there's got to be careful consideration of what tool is better. And I do like the call to just be like, my stuff's going to survive. I'm going to have mana. Let's do the best version possible.
Yeah, I mean, if he's expecting to play a bunch of blue mirrors that go long and, both players are kind of scared to act, then Deluge is obviously better than Behold. But I don't know. This is also a little bit different since I'm playing Dimir instead of Izzet. But what I found was that there are often turns, and this is kind of why Go Blind sucks too, where you have to spend your mana removing a thing, otherwise it's going to kill you, right? Like an Adeline or something hits the battlefield, and you don't have the mana to just like, just spend my turn deluging. It's like, no, you're going to get attacked for 10 or whatever. You have to like play your Infernal Grasp or whatever, and then maybe you have something else to do with that mana, maybe you don't, but like you really need to get to a turn where you just have 4 mana available, and like that's not really possible. So I have enjoyed splitting in that deck because it means that you get to weave your mana a little differently. And then there's stuff like, you get to play Celestis and immediately use the mana and things like that. So it does make you a little bit weaker against like opposing blue decks, opposing black decks to some degree. I think more often than not, my flashback deluges have been divide by zeroed, but that also means that it kind of like clears the way for Lear anyway. But
right. Timing matters a bunch in that scenario, so you're usually willing to accept that. Yeah,
in the context of the Izzet deck, when they're using it to dig for something like burn down the house or whatever, I think it's fine to just be like, well, yeah, just let their creature stick, and then I'll dig for my big sweeper, and hopefully things will be fine. But I think a lot of the same stuff applies. You have a bunch of 2 mana removal spells. You have Smoldering Egg that you want to play proactively. And in the post-board games, it's mostly like Cinderclasm that you're trying to use to clean up everything. So I think that being able to weave in Behold and not have to spend 4 mana entirely on Deluge is going to come up a lot. So if you feel like you can afford to split those numbers to some degree, I probably would. I don't know if it's like 3 Deluge, 1 Behold, or like 2/2 or something like that. I think that Deluge is more powerful, certainly, but I think that you want to like trim on that mana curve a little bit,
See, these are good puzzles to solve. I like this. I just wish there's that one. Never mind. I said I wouldn't go back to it. I'm done talking about it. This is a good format. That's all I have to say. Good.
The thing that is good about this is that you have multiple options for cards that roughly accomplish the same thing, which makes deck building interesting. Yes. So when we only had Glimmer or Chemist's Insight or Illumination or even Behold, it's boring. It's like, well, obviously I need some amount of draw twos in my deck. So you just play like 3 or 4 of this card and you're done with it. But the interesting stuff for me, and it's not just about card drawers or whatever, like you can say the same about removal spells in a lot of instances.
Yeah.
And this is certainly more apparent in the Dimir deck than it is in the Izzet deck, because it's like, well, you play Dragon's Fire because you have Goldspan Dragon in your deck. So this thing can maybe hit for 4 damage, which is relevant, right? But in Dimir, it's super interesting between like, Flunk, Infernal Grasp, Bloodchief's Thirst, Soul Shatter, Power Word Kill. Like those are interesting decisions. And that's not even talking about like the sweepers and stuff. And I do really love that.
So I think your threat decisions are interesting. I think your removal decisions are interesting. I think your card draw decisions are interesting. The only thing that's not interesting is the top end. What is going to be the closing thing? What's the biggest thing you can do?
Right.
If only there is some way we could alter that, but we can't. This is the format we're playing.
Yeah, so. There's not really anything bigger. And if things can't beat that instance of the big thing, then they can't play.
Correct.
Which is the problem.
You get it. Why am I don't know why I'm spending my time trying to convince you. You get it.
What if Dragons Existed, just didn't have Epiphany, right? It's still a very good deck.
Yeah.
And instead, the black decks could be like, well, I'm going to play a lot of Soul Shatters to beat Goldspan Dragon, and I have like Blood on the Snow to beat these aggro decks, and like we just have an extra deck in the format. Wouldn't that be cool?
Interesting. That sounds interesting.
Sure does.
Very interesting.
Sure does. I don't know. Maybe next month, Brian.
I'm patient. I'm a patient guy. I can wait. I'll be around. I'm not going anywhere.
How do you feel about Epiphany right now, just in general? Like, I think that we both can agree that being proactive is much better against the aggro decks that exist. So we probably favor Dragons versus pure Epiphany. But if you were going to play Epiphany, what would you do?
I think you were onto something with your list that combined. So I think there was like a few pieces of really great tech that came out of Worlds and the Epiphany decks. Windfall was the one that stood out to me above all else, which is why I picked the Izzet version of Epiphany to be the correct one. I don't really know how that played out. I mean, the sample sizes are too small with the data anyway. I don't know how like the Grixis versus Izzet thing played out. In playing the two decks, though, it's Izzet for me by miles. I think it just accomplishes everything the Grixis deck can do in a less clunky fashion. But that being said, I do think that the Grixis list had a really good piece of tech in Cyclone Summoner.
Yep.
I think that's just the way forward in the mono green matchup. I think it's acceptable in the mono white matchup as well, but it's better when you're maxing Windfall and you got to mush all these ideas together. And then Leer is this really cool long game thing you can do against these aggro decks as well, where you're able to just leverage these Fading Hopes in the late game. So mush it all together. Get some Leers in there. Get some Cyclone Summoners in the sideboard. Get max Windfall, max Iteration, and then you're talking about the Izzet deck that I want to be playing this weekend. And I think it'll still be very, very good and has plenty of room to maneuver.
With max Iteration, play at least 2 Demon Bolts, probably 3.
I agree. Demon Bolt has been very impressive, cleans up a lot of the problems, hits everything basically. So you can certainly afford that.
Yeah, and just none of your removal allows you to Galvanic Iteration on turn 3 and kill 2 things really. So,
yep. And then sideboard, I might just honestly have the 4 Goldspan Dragons. That might be my move in a lot of spots, and I'd probably be pretty happy with it.
Yeah, same. But then it's like, well, why aren't we just playing Dragons? And that's kind of why we think Dragons is better, right?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to make that call.
Ooh, okay.
I think that the perfectly built Izzet deck for a week will have a higher ceiling than the perfectly built Dragons deck.
I'm not talking about like a specific week. I'm talking about this week, though.
But I think if I nailed my Izzet Epiphany deck for my expected metagame this weekend, I would have a better deck than if I nailed my Izzet Dragons list. Now, do I know authoritatively this is the correct way to have Izzet built for this weekend? No, I do not. So I'm simplifying the process. I'm assuming I have the perfect configuration. I don't right now. If I were to find it, I have a feeling Izzet would still remain far ahead because it's these unexpected windfall turns and the amount of mana you can generate in a bunch of spots. It's so ridiculous. And we're talking about the rise of these other strategies, things like mono white, mono green, Dimir. I just think there's a chance that people will go back to the well and be like, well, can I do this thing now? Is it safe?
You won't play against Dimir. Don't worry about that. I don't think anyone will play it.
I don't know about that. I've seen it picking up some steam for sure. And there's also like the Azorius stuff out there that is being played in higher numbers.
Yeah, so on Magic Online especially.
Yeah, so there are some changes that people are trying to make. I think they are ultimately going to prove to be unsuccessful, but this could be a week where they believe in themselves and some other stuff pops up. And in that case, I like just the raw brokenness of the Izzet Epiphany deck.
So I would assume no Test of Talents main deck. So
no.
A little too narrow in scope, given...
Yes. I think that was a Worlds thing.
Yeah, and it was good.
A good call. Yep. But no, that wouldn't be my move now. Disdainful Stroke, probably. If I wanted a main deck counterspell, it would probably be Disdainful Stroke. I think so. I think you have to go down that road and be like, I am committed to beating mono white in my sideboard games. And I'm okay being a little bit soft there, but against everything else, it's probably the best tool right now.
Do you main deck a Cinderclasm?
I would have to look at my slots. I would like to.
Okay.
That's what I would say. But I would have to configure my deck and see what I'm left with, what kind of space I'm left with.
Let's say you had infinite slots. What would your burn down the house Cinderclasm split look like?
2-1 is off the top of my head.
Okay. I support that.
That depends on a lot, but I just don't think burn down the house is that good. It's kind of like a necessary evil where I want one floating around, but it's not doing the same job it used to. And that's why we've moved away from the 4 Battle of Frost and Fire lists, all that stuff.
Yeah.
The format has moved around that. That is something a format can adapt to. It can account for things like burn down the house.
I think
account for time walks.
I think I would do 3 Fading Hope because it's still solid, but not as effective against mono white because their curve is lower. And I would probably want at least 2 Demon Bolts, possibly a third, to go with 4 iterations. I don't know if the Cyclone Summoner stuff is good if mono green is not a huge portion of the format, but I don't know. If it were better against mono white, then it would be different for me. But I just don't think that it's all that good.
I think it's acceptable against mono white, and there's no real reason for green to disappear from the metagame. That's the big thing. It's like, Will Pulliam just won a PTQ with the mono green list. It did completely fine everywhere else except Worlds, where it got kind of clowned, but it was hard focused at Worlds, I think. And the deck is still extremely proactive, extremely strong. I wouldn't expect it to be absent this week. That's for sure.
No, it's not going to be absent. It's just that it's not going to be 30-40% of the field or whatever, because a lot of the people who would otherwise pilot it are now shifting to mono white, or is it dragons or whatever. So
yep.
It's going to be half as popular as it was before, if not less. Less quantity.
That seems like something I still need to account for. So we'll have to see maybe you can go down in summoners. Maybe you're only playing 2 summoners now, and you use that spot for an extra Cinderclasm because you expect more push towards white.
Yeah.
I'd be fine with that decision.
Yeah, and then it's just like once you're like, oh, I want to hard focus on white, or at least not hard focus, but like give it the respect that it's due, and you're playing a decent amount of Cinderclasms. How good is Cyclone Summoner actually going to be for you? Probably not very good.
No, probably not. Definitely downgrades.
Yeah. So I don't know. Neither of us are going to play Epiphany, but it's like interesting to talk about because this is the deck with the most moving pieces, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And it informs everything else around it. Like that's what decks do well will be a direct result of how Epiphany builds itself for this week, I think.
It's like what the optimal Epiphany deck looks like is a metaphor for what the metagame is going to look like.
Spot on.
Yep, there you go. Anything else? Closing thoughts?
No, I'm out of thoughts. That's going to be it for thoughts for the week. I'll try and make some more thoughts when we come back next week.
Game.
Good luck.